The space race was a not-so-friendly competition between the US and the USSR. Each country wanted to prove that it was smarter, cooler, and better than the other, and they were going to do that by going to space. The United States said they were going to launch a satellite, but the Soviet Union heard that and built and launched a satellite way before them, Sputnik 1, and they also launched a dog up there to rub it in, I guess. So later, in January of 1958, the US decided to launch their second place satellite. And then in December, they also launched SCORE, the world's first communications satellite, which is completely different. Just a year later, the Soviet Union launches Lunar 1 with hopes of landing it on the moon. However, for whatever reason, it was going way too fast, missed the moon, and started orbiting the sun instead. On the plus side, it was the first ever artificial satellite to orbit the sun. Later, they tried again with Lunar 2, and they actually made it on the moon this time. Yeah, woo, yeah. After seeing all of the USSR's achievements, the US decided to bring out the biggest space mission yet. A monkey. They sent the first ever chimp to space. A huge achievement for the United States. How is the Soviet Union going to top that achievement, you may ask? Well, of course, by sending a person to space. They sent him up there for 2 hours and let him orbit the Earth once. It was the first manned space mission ever, not including the chimp. The chimp doesn't count. In response, the US launched their rocket, the Mercury Redstone 3. I have no idea why it's called that. The pilot was up there for a whopping 15 minutes. After this, the US stops messing around with the chimps and gets to working on the space race. Full time. In July of 1965, they sent a probe to take pictures of Mars. Then, in December of 1968, they sent a shuttle to orbit around the moon. And then finally, in 1969, famous astronauts Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz, I'm sure you know them, little known figures, step out of Apollo 11 and walk around on the moon. This effectively won the space race for the United States. But the space race isn't quite over just yet. In April of 1970, the US's Apollo 13 blows up in space. Well, more accurately, an oxygen tank blows up while they're orbiting the moon. Weirdly enough, or I guess amazingly, literally everybody survives, which makes Apollo 13 the first spaceship to explode and everybody lives. 5 years later, in July of 1975, the US and USSR put aside their differences and launched a joint operation. They both launched shuttles to dock at the USSR's space station, which I'm about to talk about, ending the competition and thus ending the space race.